On the 13th of March 1697, a war galley moved across the still water of a jungle lake in what is now northern Guatemala. The vessel was an unusual thing to find this deep in the rainforest. It had been built in pieces on the coast, hauled overland through hundreds of miles of swamp and forest by Spanish soldiers and their indigenous porters, and reassembled on the western shore of Lake Petén Itzá over the previous days. It carried cannon, and 108 oars worked its decks, and at its prow stood Governor Martín de Ursúa y Arizmendi, the man Madrid had sent to finish what had been left undone for more than 170 years. As the galley pulled away from the shore in the grey light before dawn, some 10,000 Maya warriors of the Itza kingdom paddled out from the island city of Noy Petén in dugout canoes to meet it. They came from a place of 21 temples and a half-scale replica of the great Castillo at Chichen Itza, ruled by a king who carried the title Can-ek, meaning snake star, the same title his ancestors had carried for 300 years. The cannon spoke. The canoes shattered. By nightfall, the Spanish had climbed the central pyramid of the city, smashed the idols, and lowered their flag over the lake. The last independent indigenous government in the Americas had fallen, 176 years after the surrender of Aztec Tenochtitlan, in a forgotten jungle so remote that most history books would never mention it. The civilization that ended on that lake that morning had once spanned an area of more than 320,000 square kilometers, covering what is today southern Mexico, all of Guatemala and Belize, and the western edges of Honduras and El Salvador. At its height, around the year 700 of the Common Era, it had contained more than 60 major city-states, perhaps as many as 11 million people, the only fully developed writing system in the entire pre-Columbian Americas, and a deciphered historical record of named kings stretching back roughly 1,600 years. It was a long way to have come from a small farming village in the Guatemalan jungle around the year 100. This is the story of the Maya kings, the four great interconnected dynasties of Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque and Copan, and how they built, fought over and finally lost the longest continuous royal tradition the Americas would ever produce. To understand the world the Maya kings emerged from, one has to first understand the land itself, which shaped almost everything that followed. The Maya homeland was divided into three sharply different ecological zones. To the south rose the volcanic highlands of modern Guatemala and Chiapas, cooler country above 800 meters in elevation, holding the obsidian, jade and quetzal feathers that would drive long-distance trade across Mesoamerica. To the north stretched the flat limestone plain of the Yucatan Peninsula, a place with almost no surface rivers at all, where water could only be reached through natural sinkholes called cenotes or through underground cisterns called choltunes. Between these two extremes lay the central lowlands of the Petén region in what is now northern Guatemala, a vast rainforest of karst limestone receiving between 2,000 and 4,000 millimeters of rain a year, pierced by the great Usumacinta and Motagua rivers and broken up by seasonal swamps the Maya called bajos. It was in this central rainforest that the dynastic civilization would take its most spectacular form. Before the Maya kings, this region had been shaped by an older civilization to the west on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. The Olmec, who flourished between roughly 1200 and 400 before the Common Era, are sometimes called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, though the term is disputed. Scholars remain deeply divided over whether the Olmec actively shaped neighbouring societies or simply developed alongside them as one of several peer cultures. What is clear is that by the time the early Maya emerged, the basic vocabulary of Mesoamerican civilization was already in place. The Olmec had bequeathed the rubber ball game, whose oldest rubber balls date to 1600 before the Common Era. They had bequeathed colossal stone sculpture, the iconography of the were-jaguar and the feathered serpent, and almost certainly the 260-day ritual calendar that would govern Mesoamerican religious life for more than 2,000 years. The Maya themselves did not emerge slowly. In 2017, an archaeologist named Takeshi Inomata used airborne laser scanning to identify an enormous rectangular earthen plateau at a place called Aguada Fenix in the Mexican state of Tabasco. The structure measured 1,413 meters long, 399 meters wide, and up to 15 meters high. Radiocarbon dating placed its construction between 1050 and 700 before the Common Era. It is the largest and oldest Maya monumental construction ever found, and crucially, it shows no evidence of kings at all. Communal labour had preceded hierarchy. By 600 before the Common Era, the city of Nakbe in the northern Petén was raising pyramids 18 meters tall. By 300 before the Common Era, the nearby city of El Mirador had become Mesoamerica's first true superstate, home to perhaps 100,000 people in its greater basin and dominated by the La Danta pyramid complex, a structure of roughly 2.8 million cubic meters of fill, rising 72 meters above the rainforest floor. La Danta is, by volume, among the largest pre-modern structures on the entire planet. At a smaller pre-classic site called San Bartolo, excavated by William Saturno beginning in 2001, archaeologists found murals dated to roughly 100 before the Common Era. The paintings depicted the birth of the maize god, the journeys of the hero twins, and the four great trees that held up the four corners of the cosmos, the earliest visual record of a mythological system that would not be written down in alphabetic form until the 16th century. The same site yielded the earliest secure examples of Maya writing, dating to between 300 and 200 before the Common Era. A cosmology fit for divine kings was already in place. The Maya imagined a three-layered universe, a watery underworld called Xibalba below, a middle earth balanced on the back of a cosmic caiman, and 13 heavens above, all pierced by a great cosmic tree called the Huacachan. From this cosmology emerged the institution that would dominate the next 1,000 years of Mesoamerican history, the Kuhul Ajau, which translates literally as the Holy Lord. The king understood as the embodiment of the maize god himself and the conduit between the cosmic layers. Then, around the year 150 of the Common Era, something went catastrophically wrong. El Mirador and most of the great pre-classic centres in the basin were abandoned within a few generations. Pollen and sediment cores from lakes in the region record sudden deforestation driven by the enormous demand for firewood needed to burn limestone into lime plaster. Stalagmite climate records show a severe drought between roughly 120 and 190 of the Common Era. Defensive walls were thrown up at the western edges of El Mirador, suggesting external threat. The basin never recovered. Power shifted south to previously secondary centres, to places named Tikal and Huaxactun and Caracol and Calakmul and Palenque. It is worth pausing here to consider where the name Maya itself comes from, because the answer is more complicated than most people assume. The classic Maya did not call themselves Maya at all. They identified themselves by city and by dynasty, the Lord of Tikal, the Lord of the Snake Place, the Lord of Palenque. The collective term seems to derive from the Yucatec Maya word mayab, meaning approximately flat, an indigenous name for the Yucatan Peninsula itself, possibly connected to the post-classic city of Mayapan, which translates as Banner of the Maya. Christopher Columbus, on his fourth voyage in 1502, encountered traders off the coast of Honduras who told him they came from a place called Maya. The name stuck. Tikal's ancient name was Yax Mutul, meaning first Mutul, with Mutul referring to a tied bundle or top knot of hair. The snake dynasty's name Karnul simply means snake place. The word Tikal itself is a much later invention applied in the 1840s from an It's a Maya phrase meaning at the waterhole, referring to a reservoir used by 19th century chicle harvesters. It appears in no ancient inscription. The dynasty of Tikal traced its origins to a founder named Yax Eb Suk, meaning first step, shark, who is thought to have ruled around the year 90 of the Common Era. His likely tomb has been excavated beneath the city's North Acropolis. The body inside was missing its head, which had been replaced by a small jade mask wearing the trefoil headband of Maya royalty, suggesting death in battle. The early kings who followed are poorly known, but on the 6th of July in the year 292, a Tikal king named Foliated Jaguar commissioned a carved stone monument that historians now call Stela 29. It bore the first long count date ever found in the Maya lowlands, and by convention this is the moment that marks the beginning of what scholars call the Classic period. To understand what made Maya kingship distinctive, it helps to grasp what the institution of the Kuhul Ajar actually did. The Holy Lord was not simply a political ruler, he was the indispensable mediator between the layers of the cosmos, the one whose blood drawn from his tongue or his earlobes or his genitals with stingray spines fed the gods and kept the universe in motion. He carried the Kawil scepter, a writhing lightning serpent representing the god of lineage and royal legitimacy at the moment of his accession. He danced in jaguar pelts and quetzal feather headdresses on top of pyramids built to specific astronomical alignments. His subjects believed, with apparent sincerity, that the rains and the harvests depended on his ritual performance. This was an enormously powerful system. It was also, as the Maya would eventually discover, an enormously fragile one. For nearly 3 centuries, the Tikal dynasty consolidated its position in the central Petén. Then, on the 16th of January in the year 378, something unprecedented happened. A warlord arrived at Tikal from the west. He bore the title Kalumte, a rank higher than the ordinary Kuhul Ajau, and the name Siaj Kak, which translates as "fire is born." He had passed through several smaller Maya courts along the western edge of the Petén in the previous days. On the same day he reached Tikal, the city's reigning king, Chak Tok Ichak I, meaning Great Jaguar Paw, died. The conjunction is too precise to be coincidence. Tikal Stela 31, dedicated some 67 years later by a king named Stormy Sky, records the event using the verb ochchin, which means entering the territory and is the standard classic Maya phrasing for military conquest. 18 months later, on the 12th of September 379, a new king took the throne at Tikal. His name was Yax Nun Ahin I, meaning first crocodile. Stela 31 explicitly names his father as a figure called Spear Thrower Owl, whose own accession date, the 4th of May 374, is also recorded at Tikal. The strong consensus among modern Mayanists, established by David Stewart in a landmark paper published in the year 2000, is that Spear Thrower Owl was the ruler of Teotihuacan, the great metropolis of central Mexico that lay 1,000 kilometers to the northwest. A coup in Mexico had installed a new dynasty in Guatemala. The implications of this single event are difficult to overstate. It means that Mesoamerica around the year 378 was not a collection of isolated cultures, but a continent-spanning network so tightly integrated that political shifts in one capital could directly install rulers in another 1,000 kilometers away. Most visitors today who walk the Avenue of the Dead at Teotihuacan, between the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, have no idea that the lords of that city once reached into the Maya rainforest and reshuffled its royal house. the intervention did not erase Tikal's existing dynasty. Instead, it grafted onto it. Yuknum Ahin married a local Maya noblewoman, and their son, Stormy Sky, who acceded in 411, carefully wove the foreign legitimacy of Teotihuacan, together with descent from Yaks-eb Suk, the original Tikal founder. The visible signs of the new order, however, were everywhere. Tikal's architecture began to feature the talud tablero style of central Mexico, green obsidian from Teotihuacan-controlled mines, and the war imagery of Tlaloc, the Mexican rain god wielding atlatls. The new order then exported itself outward. On the 5th of September 426, a man named Kinich Yaks Kuk Mo, meaning Radiant First Quetzalmacor, took the Cahuil scepter at a ceremonial location called the Origin House and founded a new dynasty at Copan in what is now western Honduras. Strontium isotope analysis of his teeth, recovered from a tomb deep beneath the Copan Acropolis, points to a central Piten origin, most probably from Tikal or Caracol. His skeleton shows a healed parry-fracture on his left forearm, matching his depiction on the famous altar queue at Copan as a left-handed warrior with the Tlaloc goggles of central Mexico. 5 years later, on the 11th of March 431, another founder named Kirk Bahalam I, meaning Quetzal Jaguar, established the dynasty that would eventually become Palenque, far to the west in modern Chiapas. The Teotihuacan-derived legitimacy ideology was spreading outward from Tikal in a slow wave across the entire Maya world. 3 of the 4 great dynasties that would dominate the classic period were now in place. The 4th, however, did not yet rule from Calakmul. The Snake dynasty, which would eventually become Tikal's greatest rival, originated at a different site called Zibanche, in what is now southern Quintana Roo in Mexico. The earlier identification of Calakmul as the original snake capital has been overturned by a generation of work led by the Mayanist Simon Martin, supported by recent excavations at Zibanche that have produced inscriptions bearing the snake emblem glyph, dating back to the 5th century. Through the early 6th century, the Snake Kings at Zibanche assembled what amounted to a counter-coalition. Their political method was different from Tikal's. Where Tikal had ruled through direct hegemony reinforced by the prestige of Teotihuacan, the Snake dynasty built a network of subordinate kings tied to Zibanche by marriage, ritual, and military protection. In 546, Snake forces installed a king of their choosing on the throne of Naranjo. In 553, Tikal counter-installed a king at Caracol, intending him as a Tikal client. 3 years later, in 556, Tikal inexplicably attacked its own creation, and Caracol promptly defected to the Snake camp. On the 29th of April 562, the patient diplomatic work of the Snake Kings detonated in a single afternoon. A king of the Snake dynasty named Sky Witness, coordinating with the rulers of Caracol, executed what Maya inscriptions call a Star War, a Venus-timed military assault denoted by a special glyph showing the planet Venus shedding water. Tikal was crushed. Wak-Chan Kawil, meaning Sky Witness, the reigning king of Tikal, disappeared from the historical record on that day. He was almost certainly captured and ritually sacrificed at Caracol. What followed has come to be known as the Tikal hiatus. For the next 130 years, no major dated monument was erected at Tikal at all. Some of the older stelae in the city's centre were defaced and buried by what appear to have been hostile occupiers. The dominant city of the central Peten had been silenced. The Snake century had begun. Around the year 636, the Snake dynasty made the most consequential move in its history. A non-ruling snake lord named Yuknum Head defeated the reigning Xibanche king Waxacla-Jun Ubar-Khan in battle, 58 days before his own accession on the 30th of April, and shifted the capital of the Snake Kingdom south to Calakmul, a city the Calakmul hieroglyphic stairway calls by its ancient name Uxtitun, meaning 3 stones, in reference to the mythical hearthstones of creation. 2 months after that, on the same day in late April 636, a different snake lord, Yuknum II, took the throne at Calakmul itself. He was 36 years old. He would rule for almost 50 years. He is arguably the most powerful Maya king in the entire deciphered record. Yuknum the Great, as he is sometimes called, didn't rule through brute force alone. He ruled through the most sophisticated political coalition classic Maya history ever produced. He married his daughters into the dynasties of La Corona and El Peruhuaca in the west, where one of them, the warrior queen Lady Cable, came to outrank her own husband by holding the supreme Kalumti title in her own name. In 682, he dispatched a noblewoman named Lady Six Sky to refound the dynasty of Naranjo in what is now Belize. He installed 3 successive generations of kings at Canquen, controlling the headwaters of the Passion River. And he ran a generation-long proxy war against Tikal through a city Tikal had itself founded as a forward base, Dos Pilas in the Petex Batun region. In 648, the Dos Pilas king Baalaj Chan Kawil, originally a Tikal loyalist and possibly a son of Tikal's own royal house, defected to Calakmul. Yuknum the Great attacked Dos Pilas in 650, drove Balaj briefly into exile at Aguateca, then reinstalled him as a snake client. In 657, Calakmul invaded the Tikal heartland directly. Tikal's reigning king, Nun Ujol Chak, was forced to flee. In 679, Dos Pilas defeated and killed Nun Ujol Chak in a battle the inscriptions describe with chilling precision, recording that the blood was pooled and the skulls were piled. The Maya world had a hegemon. The snake network, at its full extent, stretched from the Usumacinta River in the west to western Belize in the east, from Canquen in the south to Xibanche in the north. To grasp the scale of what Yuknum the Great had achieved, it helps to consider that this single political coalition controlled territory comparable in size to the contemporary Tang dynasty subordinate kingdoms of Korea or Vietnam. It was the largest unified political project the Maya lowlands would ever produce. Palenque, far to the west in the Chiapas hills, was a direct casualty of snake expansion. On the 23rd of April 599, the Xibanche king Une Chan, meaning scroll serpent, led one of the longest known Maya military expeditions, roughly 382 kilometers across the lowlands, and axed Palenque. The reigning queen, Lady Yol Iknal, one of the very few women known to have held the Kuhulajau title in her own right rather than as a regent, survived the attack, but Palenque became a tributary of the Snake dynasty. A second devastating snake assault came on the 7th of April 611, this time with the Snake King entering Palenque personally. The dynasty collapsed into regency under a noblewoman named Lady Sak Kuk, possibly understood as the earthly embodiment of a mother goddess called Muan Mat. Then, on the 29th of July 615, her 12-year-old son took the throne. His name was Ka'inich Janaab Pakal I, meaning radiant flower shield. He would rule Palenque for 68 years and 33 days, which is the longest verified reign in the entire pre-Columbian history of the Americas, and one of the longest reigns documented anywhere in the world before the modern era. Pakal rebuilt Palenque into what most art historians now consider the most architecturally refined city in the entire Maya world. He commissioned the palace with its unique 4-story tower, a building unparalleled in classic Maya architecture, and the famous aqueduct that carried the Otulum stream beneath the palace floor. and he commissioned his own funerary pyramid, the Temple of the Inscriptions, the construction of which began during his reign and was completed by his son after his death. Pakal died on the 28th of August, 683, at roughly the age of 80. The construction of his tomb sealed his sarcophagus inside the pyramid for 1,269 years. That tomb was rediscovered in the modern era under remarkable circumstances. In 1949, the Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruz Luillier noticed a stone in the floor of the Temple of the Inscriptions with finger holes carved into it, suggesting it could be lifted. For 3 years, he and his team cleared rubble from a hidden staircase beneath the temple floor. On the 15th of June 1952, they finally broke through into the burial chamber itself. Inside was a sarcophagus weighing 5 tons, sealed by an enormous carved stone lid that depicted Pakal at the moment of his death, falling backwards into the open jaws of the underworld while the cosmic tree rose from his body, marking his rebirth as the maize god. Pakal's tomb has become, for the Americas, what King Tutankhamun's tomb is for Egypt. It is also, regrettably, the source of one of the most persistent misreadings in archaeological history. In 1968, the Swiss writer Erich von Däniken published a book called Chariots of the Gods, in which he reinterpreted the sarcophagus lid as a depiction of an ancient astronaut piloting a spacecraft, complete with what he claimed were exhaust flames and a breathing apparatus. The reading is, in the unanimous view of every working Mayanist, completely wrong. The iconography is straightforward classic Maya cosmology, every element matched by parallel scenes elsewhere. But the spacecraft theory has lodged itself in popular culture so firmly that the sarcophagus lid is probably better known today through that mistaken reading than through its actual meaning. While the snake century was reaching its peak under Yuknum the Great, the conditions of Tikal's revival were quietly being assembled. On the 3rd of May 682, a young man named Jasor Chan Carwheel I, meaning car wheel that clears the sky, took the throne at Tikal. He immediately claimed the Kalumte title, the supreme rank that had not been held at Tikal in over a century. He began rebuilding the central plaza. He commissioned new monuments. He waited. Then, on the 5th of August 695, the wait ended. Tikal Lintel 3 of Temple 1, Jasor's own funerary pyramid, records that on that day he brought down the flint and shield of Yuknum Yichak Kak, meaning fiery claw, the successor of Yuknum the Great as king of Calakmul. He captured the snake war god effigy, a serpentine supernatural called Waxaklajun Uba Khan, carried into battle on the Calakmul royal palanquin. The lintel shows Jasor enthroned beneath the captured god. The single most striking detail of the entire campaign is the dating. Jasor deliberately staged his triumph on the 13th Katun anniversary, a period of 256 years since the death of spear-thrower Owl of Teotihuacan, the great-grandfather of his dynasty by adoption. Across 317 years of Maya history, he had reached back into the founding moment of his lineage to legitimize the present. The snake palanquin was paraded through Tikal's central plaza. Yuknum Yichak Kak himself was probably entombed at Calakmul. A spectacular burial discovered at Calakmul, Tomb 4 in Structure 2, contained a jade mosaic funerary mask, jaguar pelts, and codex-style ceramics, and is now thought to be his. Calakmul never again erected a war victory stela. Snake hegemony had been broken at the symbolic and religious level. The Maya world had, in a single afternoon, returned to a roughly bipolar configuration with Tikal again at its centre. Copan, far to the southeast, had meanwhile been quietly approaching its own golden age. A king named Smoke Imix, formerly Kak Uti Wits Carwheel, ruled there for 67 years, from 628 to 695. His successor, Uaxtlajuan Ubra Kawil, whose name has been rendered as 18 rabbits since the early days of Maya decipherment, became the greatest patron of art and architecture in Copan's history. He commissioned 7 enormous freestanding stelae in 3-dimensional high relief, unmatched in technical sophistication anywhere in the Maya world. He rebuilt the Copan ball court. He began the hieroglyphic stairway, a stone staircase of 62 steps, inscribed with more than 2,200 glyphs, which to this day remains the single longest inscription known from the ancient Americas. On his great Stela A, he carved a text grouping Copan with Calakmul, Palenque and Tikal as the 4 cardinal kingdoms of the Maya cosmos. On the 31st of December 724, he installed a subordinate king named Teotihuacan at the small downstream city of Quirigua, a vassal seat positioned to guard the strategic Motagua river trade in jade and obsidian. 14 years later, that vassal would destroy him. On the 3rd of May 738, Teotihuacan of Quirigua captured 18 rabbit of Copan at a place called Cokwitz, meaning Turtle Hill. 6 days later, Quirigua's inscriptions record the axe event, the chak, the ritual decapitation of the captured king. A vassal had beheaded his overlord. The reversal was so improbable that for many decades after its decipherment, scholars struggled to explain it. The current consensus rests on a single piece of evidence. 2 years before the strike, in 736, Quirigua's Stela I records that Kaktilu had hosted a delegation from a man named Wamokawil of Calakmul. The Snake dynasty, more than 4 decades after its own catastrophic defeat by Tikal in 695, had reached down through its diplomatic network to engineer the destruction of Tikal's most important southeastern ally. It was the last great Snake proxy victory. Copan would fall into a 17-year inscriptional silence, with one wistful scribal phrase from this period lamenting that there were no altars, no pyramids, no places. Quirigua's golden age was spectacular but brief. In 771, Kaktilu raised Stela E, the tallest carved monolithic stela in the entire Maya world at 10.6 meters and 65 tons of red sandstone. By the early 9th century, both Copan and Quirigua were spent. By the year 700 of the Common Era, the Maya world had reached its full extent, and the scale of it has only recently begun to be understood. In 2018, a consortium of archaeologists called the Pacunam Foundation used airborne laser scanning, known as LiDAR, to survey just 2,144 square kilometres of the northern Petén rainforest. The results were transformative. The survey revealed 61,480 previously unknown ancient structures hidden beneath the jungle canopy. Population estimates for the late classic Maya lowlands had to be revised upward to between 7 and 11 million people. The Maya, far from being the small scatter of jungle clearings that early 20th century scholars had imagined, were now understood to have built an integrated urban civilization on the scale of contemporary China or the Mediterranean world. Tikal Temple 4, the funerary monument of Jasor's son, Yikin Chan Kawil, completed around 741, rose to 64.6 metres at the top of its roof comb, making it to this day the tallest surviving pre-Columbian structure anywhere in the Americas. The discovery of the LiDAR-revealed network has been compared with some justification to what the Hubble Space Telescope did for astronomy. An entire civilization, hidden in plain sight beneath the forest, had been brought into focus in a single survey season. Then the system began to fail. The collapse, when it came, wasn't sudden, and it was not total, but it was unmistakable. The last dated stone monuments at each of the great classic cities trace its outlines clearly. Palenque erected its last verifiable monument in 799, the accession of an obscure king on a humble blackware vessel rather than a stela. Quirigua's last text dates to 810. Copan's last carved monument, the unfinished altar L, was abandoned in 822. Tikal stela 11 was dedicated on the 15th of August, 869. Calakmul stela 61 carries a date in 909. The latest long count date anywhere in the Maya world, on Monument 101 at the city of Tonina, falls on the 15th of January 909. After that, silence. The causes of the collapse have been debated for more than a century, and recent paleoclimate evidence has clarified the picture considerably. Drought came first. Sediment cores extracted from Lake Chachancanab in Yucatan, marine cores from the Cariaco Basin off Venezuela, and most precisely a stalagmite record from Yok Balloum Cave in Belize, published in the journal Science in 2012, have documented severe multi-decadal droughts that peaked around the years 760, 810, 860, and 910. Rainfall was reduced by an average of 50%, with peak reductions of 70% during the worst years. Warfare came second, or perhaps in parallel. Excavations led by Arthur Demarest at Dos Pilas and Aguateca in the Petex Batun region have shown elites dismantling their own temples for stone to throw up defensive walls around their central plazas during the late 8th century. Aguateca built 4 kilometers of fortifications before falling around the year 800. Agricultural collapse came third. Pollen cores from across the lowlands show deforestation reaching unprecedented levels, and the marginal upland soils that the population had pushed onto during peak growth simply gave out under sustained drought. And then, behind all of these material causes came the failure of an idea. The Kuhul Ajau, the Holy Lord, had built his authority on the claim that he personally maintained the cosmos. The rains came because of his blood. The harvests came because of his ritual. The victories came because of his communion with the gods. When all three failed simultaneously, when the rains stopped and the harvests failed and the wars were lost, the institution of divine kingship lost its credibility. There was no fallback. The Kuhul Ajau was not simply a political figure who could be replaced by a new political figure. He was the cosmic system itself. When the cosmos appeared to refuse to cooperate, the system had nowhere to go. By the early 10th century, the southern lowland cities had been almost entirely abandoned. The rainforest began to swallow them. But the collapse was regional, not total, and this fact has been consistently understated in popular accounts of Maya history. While the southern Petén emptied, the northern Yucatan flourished. The great city of Chichen Itza dominated the peninsula from roughly 900 to 1200 of the Common Era, integrating long-distance trade in salt, cotton, cacao, and gold across Mesoamerica. The Puuc cities of Uxmal, Sayil, Caba, and Labna reached their architectural peak during the same terminal classic period when the southern cities were dying. After Chichen Itza's own decline, a new capital called Mayapan rose around 1220, ruled by a dominant lineage called the Copán dynasty, in alliance and rivalry with the Xiu and Chel houses. Mayapan was walled, held between 15 and 17,000 inhabitants, and governed northern Yucatan through what the Spanish chroniclers later called the League of Mayapan, a system in which the Cocom kept noble hostages from subject towns to ensure their loyalty. In 1441, in the middle of a multi-decade drought that paleoclimate records have now linked to the violence, the Xiu rose against the Cocom, massacred the ruling family at a feast, and abandoned the city. Northern Yucatan fragmented into more than 16 small kingdoms called Cuchcabal. In the highlands of Guatemala, 3 post-classic Maya kingdoms rose to fill the political vacuum: the Quiche at the city of Cumarcaj, the Cacchical at Iximche, and the Tzutujil around Lake Atitlan. These were the active, functioning Maya states that the Spanish would encounter when they arrived in the 16th century. That arrival came in 1524. Hernán Cortés had taken Tenochtitlan 3 years earlier on the 13th of August 1521, and his lieutenant Pedro de Alvarado, called Tonatiuh, meaning the sun, by the indigenous peoples on account of his blonde hair, was sent south to subdue the Maya highlands. He marched with roughly 400 Spanish soldiers and several thousand Tlaxcalan and Cholulan indigenous allies, the same coalition that had brought down the Aztecs. On the 20th of February 1524, the Quiche war captain Tekun Uman was killed at the Battle of El Pinar near the modern city of Quetzaltenango, in an engagement that Quiche tradition remembers as a personal duel with Alvarado himself, though Alvarado's own letter mentions only the death of one of the 4 chiefs without naming him. On the 7th of March 1524, Alvarado lured the 2 paramount Quiche kings, Oxib-Ke and Beleheb-Tzi, into his camp at Cumarcaj under pretense of peace negotiations, then burned them alive. Cumarcaj was destroyed the same day. The Cacchical initially allied with the Spanish, then revolted when Alvarado demanded weekly tribute of 1,000 gold leaves. The Mam, Tzutujil and Pocomam kingdoms fell in succession over the following decade. The Yucatan was conquered separately by the Montejo family between 1527 and 1546. With Mérida founded on the 6th of January, 1542. By the middle of the 16th century, almost every Maya kingdom that had existed at first contact was a Spanish colonial possession. Almost every kingdom. Deep in the Petén jungle, on an island in the middle of Lake Petén Itzá, the Itza Maya kingdom of Noj Petén endured. The Itza were migrants from northern Yucatan, descendants of refugees from the fall of Mayapan in 1441. Their kings carried the title Can Ek, meaning snake star, and ruled from a city of 21 temples and the half-scale castillo modelled on Chichen Itza. Cortés himself had visited the kingdom peaceably in March 1525 on his way overland to Honduras, leaving behind a lame horse that the Itza later venerated as a stone deity called Ximinchac. Spanish missionaries who attempted to evangelize the kingdom in the 17th century were killed. Diplomatic embassies arrived and returned empty-handed. The Itza had read their own Katun prophecies, the cyclical Maya predictions of historical periods, and concluded that the time for their conversion had not yet come. Then, on the 13th of March 1697, the Spanish concluded that the time had come. Governor Martín de Ursúa y Arizmendi arrived at the western shore of Lake Petén Itzá with 235 Spanish soldiers, 120 indigenous auxiliaries, and the disassembled hull of a 108-oar war galley that had been carried overland in pieces. The galley was reassembled at the lakeshore. At dawn it was launched. Some 10,000 Itza warriors in dugout canoes paddled out to meet it. Cannon and musket fire shattered the canoes. The Spanish stormed ashore on the island, climbed the central pyramid, smashed the idols, and by nightfall had hoisted the Spanish flag over the lake. The date was, by historical coincidence, 172 years to the day after Cortés had first visited the same lake on his march to Honduras. The last independent Maya kingdom had fallen 176 years after Tenochtitlan. The historian Grant Jones, who reconstructed the conquest from Spanish archival sources, has estimated that 88% of the lake's Maya population died during the first decade of colonial rule, mostly from European epidemic disease. The island was renamed Nuestra Señora de los Remedios y San Pablo. It is today the town of Flores, the capital of the Petén department of Guatemala. The Maya did not disappear. This is the single most important sentence in any honest account of what followed, because it contradicts the popular impression that the civilization ended with the classic collapse or with the Spanish conquest. Today, between 6 and 7 million people across 5 countries speak more than 30 distinct Mayan languages. Guatemala officially recognizes 21 of them as national languages. Mexico recognizes 8. The largest groups, the Quiche, the Yucatec, the Quechua, and the Mam, each number close to or above 1 million speakers. Across highland Guatemala, indigenous Maya peoples remain the demographic majority, the unbroken line that began in the pre-Classic Petén villages that passed through the classic dynasties of Tikal and Calakmul and Palenque and Copan, that survived the classic collapse and the post-classic warfare, and the 17th century galeota at Noy Petén runs directly to the present day. In a previous video on this channel about the Habsburg children who survived the collapse of their empire, we traced how Otto von Habsburg carried his family's institutional memory across 90 years, from the train window leaving Schönbrunn as an 8-year-old in 1918 to the signing of the Lisbon Treaty in 2008. The Maya have done something comparable on a scale 13 times longer. They have carried memory across 13 centuries, not as a royal family in exile, but as living peoples on the same land. The 20th century tested that continuity severely. During the Guatemalan Civil War between 1960 and 1996, the United Nations Historical Clarification Commission later established that the Guatemalan military and allied forces committed acts of genocide against the indigenous Maya population, particularly under the regime of General Efraín Ríos Montt in 1982 and 1983. 83% of identified victims of the conflict were Maya. More than 200,000 people were killed or disappeared. More than 450 villages were destroyed. In 1992, in recognition of her work documenting these abuses and advocating for indigenous rights, the Quiche Maya activist Rigoberta Menchú Tum was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The Maya, as a political force in modern Central America, were not a memory but a present and contested reality. The recovery of the ancient civilization in Western memory followed its own dramatic course. In 1841 and 1843, the American diplomat and writer John Lloyd Stevens and the English artist Frederick Catherwood published 2 illustrated volumes of their travels through the southern Maya region, introducing the great ruined cities to a broad reading public for the first time. Photographic surveys by Alfred Maudslay in the 1880s and 90s laid the foundation for the scientific study of the inscriptions. The German librarian Ernst Förstermann cracked the Maya calendar from the Dresden Codex in the same decade. But then, in the early 20th century, the field took a long, wrong turn. The British scholar J. Eric Thompson, who dominated Mayanist studies for nearly 40 years, insisted that the Maya script was non-phonetic, that it couldn't record actual language, and that the Maya themselves had been peaceful astronomer priests rather than the warlike dynastic civilization that the inscriptions, when finally read, would reveal them to be. The breakthrough came in 1952 when a young Soviet linguist named Yuri Konorozov, working in Leningrad with no fieldwork access to the Maya region at all, proved that the script was in fact logosyllabic, combining word signs and phonetic syllables in the manner of Egyptian hieroglyphs or Chinese characters. Thompson dismissed the work as Marxist propaganda. He was wrong. In 1960, the Russian-born American scholar Tatiana Proskuryakov demonstrated that the inscriptions of Piedras Negras recorded the actual biographies of named kings, with birth dates, accession dates, and death dates. By the 1970s, a generation of younger scholars, including Linda Shale, David Stewart, Stephen Houston, Nikolai Gruber, and Simon Martin, had broken open the dynastic histories that this script had concealed in plain sight for centuries. Today, approximately 90% of the known Maya glyphs can be read. The deciphered historical record of pre-Columbian America runs to thousands of named individuals, datable events, and reconstructible royal genealogies. It is, in scope and precision, comparable to the deciphered records of pharaonic Egypt. For the traveller, the legacy is everywhere accessible. The Great Pyramids of Tikal still rise above the rainforest canopy in northern Guatemala, exactly where they have stood for 1,300 years. Pakal's tomb at Palenque is open to visitors, the sarcophagus lid in the museum on site. The hieroglyphic stairway at Copan in Honduras remains the longest inscription in the ancient Americas. Chichen Itza in the northern Yucatan draws more than 2 million visitors a year. Calakmul, deep in the biosphere reserve that bears its name on the Mexican border, is one of the most remote major archaeological sites in the world. The LiDAR surveys of recent years continue to reveal new cities, new causeways, and new agricultural systems beneath the jungle canopy. The civilization, once thought to be small and contained, keeps becoming larger and older with every survey season. What the 4 great dynasties of Tikal and Calakmul and Palenque and Copan built, what their descendants carried through the 17th century fall of Nopaten and the genocides of the 20th century, is not a memory, but a living inheritance. The Maya kings ruled for 1,600 years of carved and deciphered dates. The peoples whose ancestors built that royal tradition have endured on the same land for 2,000 years and more. What do you think of the Maya kings? Were they one of the most sophisticated dynastic civilizations the ancient world ever produced? Masters of writing, astronomy, and statecraft whose accomplishments rival any contemporary kingdom in Europe or Asia? Or were they trapped by the very institution that built them, a divine kingship so total that when the rains failed, the entire system collapsed under its own weight? Please let us know in the comments section, and in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.